Good afternoon, I'm Dennis Vittorian, and this is the 25th hour helping you remember everything that happened beyond the 24/7 news cycle. Now in this week's news for the week of March 28th to April 3rd, 2021, COVID numbers are inching back up. Marijuana has been legalized in New York, the state budget deadline was blown, and Biden reveals his infrastructure plan. Now onto the show. Things may have changed by the time you heard this. Starting with de Blasio. The Gothamist reported that despite the increase in vaccinations, New York City still has a stubbornly high amount of COVID hospitalizations and deaths in mid-February, with the weekly case average staying around between 3,600 and 4,200. Public health officials generally blame indoor events without masks. The number of new cases has held steady at 25,000 a week. De Blasio said the city has vaccinated 4 million people and is on track to vaccinate 5 million by June. City public health officials said that variants caused 70% of all New York City's COVID cases between March 15th to the 21st. Lenox Hill Hospital, Manhattan, is in hot water for billing patients $3,000 for COVID nasal swab tests. The tests are supposed to be free. Hospital officials claimed that the patients in question received more advanced care than just a test, but couldn't elaborate on what the advanced care was. Although the Yankees had a successful baseball opening day this week, the Mets had to delay their start to the baseball season after some players tested positive for coronavirus. The Mets and Nationals later announced they were postponing their entire series. A new report in the Gotham Gazette examined why Comptroller Scott Stringer isn't making more of a splash in the mayoral primary, despite being the only candidate in the field who ran for a citywide office before. There are a few months until the Democratic primary, and Stringer has been fighting for third place among various polls, although half of the Democratic base said they haven't made up their mind yet. Also keep in mind that at this point in 2013, Anthony Weiner was at the top of the polls. This sort of news comes out right in time for Stringer to set his sights against the ostensible frontrunner Andrew Yang. And when Yang called on de Blasio to practice restraint when the federal government finally delivers its aid to the city, Stringer laughed off Yang's suggestion, pointing out that de Blasio is already constrained under the terms of the aid because the mayor can only spend the money over the course of 2 years. Maya Wiley piled onto Yang as well, saying the ostensible frontrunner has no idea how government is run. Yang may have won some degree of sympathy, however. When he was treated for kidney stones after being rushed to the emergency room for abdominal pain, he turned out okay. Stringer also released his economic recovery plan on Monday, which would place $1 billion in federal aid in small business and nonprofit grants, reduce the city's unemployment rate, cutting red tape for business permits, reverse cuts to the Parks Department, create jobs in the green energy industry, and more. Former Sanitation Commissioner Catherine Garcia released a healthy food plan that would provide city subsidies at community restaurants so that families can eat and afford healthier food. Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams was endorsed by Clara Thompson, the mother of the late Brooklyn District Attorney Ken Thompson, who passed away from cancer. Candidate Diane Morales announced that she isn't going to take part in any online forums anymore, saying that there isn't a lot of time before the primary and the Zoom forums haven't made a large enough splash. Zoom forums have been the norm for political candidates because of the pandemic, but the ubiquity of the forums have sparked memes of their own. Wall Street executive Ray McGuire became the only major mayoral candidate not to release his tax returns. His campaign said they're going to release all documents needed by the Conflict of Interest Board, but wouldn't commit to McGuire releasing the tax returns in general. Two Republican mayoral candidates squared off in their own debate, with John Catsimatidis' company sponsoring the event, leaving the third Republican candidate not to participate due to the perceived conflict of interest. Catsimatidis has endorsed Curtis Sliwa, who took part in the debate with Fernando Mateo. Although the two candidates agree that the city has become a lawless wasteland and the police need to get all of their funding back, Sliwa went after Mateo for Mateo's donations to de Blasio.
You say you're not a politician, yet you're a de Blasio Republican. You raised money for him. Straw purchase donors, which is illegal. You helped elect the man who single-handedly has destroyed this city.
Straw donations is illegal. You go to jail for that. I never in my life have done that. I've never been accused of that until right now by this man. You can't believe what he is saying because it's not true. Shame on you for saying that. But you know what? Have you asked your former boss, John Catsimatidis, why he donated $50,000 to de Blasio? Have you asked Donald Trump why he donated tens of thousands of dollars to Hillary Clinton?
State Senator Brian Benjamin, who was already in hot water for a campaign funding scandal, where numerous donors got their money back after they said they never contributed to Benjamin in the first place, is now a subject of a report where Benjamin used almost $7,000 in campaign money ostensibly to help pay for his wedding at a jazz concert, and labeled it as constituent services. His campaign said Benjamin hadn't done anything inappropriate. Councilman Brad Lander, who led the progressive lane of the comptroller candidates, was endorsed by powerful progressive Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, giving him an influential supporter to counter the entry of Council Speaker Corey Johnson into the race. Former mayoral candidate and now comptroller candidate Zach Iskell had a temporary heart attack when the Board of Elections put his petitions on the defect list because he didn't correctly list his party in the right place. Iskell fixed the issue, and now he's back on the board's ledger. A week after students were able to enroll in in-person learning since high schools reopened, 25,000 students opted to switch from their remote learning to going back to the classroom. De Blasio teased changes to the Department of Education's two-case rule, which says schools have to shut down if 2 COVID cases are found among the teachers, staff, or students. The mayor said on the Brian Lehrer Show that next week he'll announce a change to the rule. Residents of Sunset Park are warning that the opening of a massive development center built by Developers Bridge Development Partners and DH Property Holdings, enough development in the name there, are going to invite an onslaught of trucks to the neighborhoods and possibly more traffic deaths. The neighborhood is already reportedly on edge after the deaths of 6 people in 2019. The MTA was told by the Federal Highway Administration that it had to complete an environmental assessment and a sign of impending approval for New York City's congestion pricing plan, which would place a toll on drivers driving below 61st Street in Manhattan. Congestion pricing is expected to raise $15 billion in revenue meant to help fund the MTA's capital plan to reform the transit system. The cuts to the C and F subway lines are being reversed as well after outcries by union workers. De Blasio said the city is restoring funding this week to a litter basket pickup program, which had its budget cut 60% or $300 million. 440 pickup routes will now be restored, with an extra 100 sanitation trucks added to pick up garbage cans, now adding on Sundays. The Parks Department is said to be removing the concrete animal sculptures found in numerous playgrounds around the city, saying they're moving the structures temporarily because of construction at the parks. 2 videos showing anti-Asian hate crimes have left New Yorkers stunned this week. One video shows an assailant kicking an elderly Asian woman in the head on the ground as building workers closed the door in front of her instead of intervening. That man was later arrested and charged. In another video, a subway brawl shows a young black male attacking 2 Asian men with no one intervening either. The NYPD Hate Crime Task Force said they're investigating the incident and that 33 anti-Asian hate crimes have been reported so far this year.
We, in every way as a city, have to work together to stop these attacks. We are seeing them, different people, different places, they're all unacceptable. And again, the crucial need is for, in every case, whether someone regards it as a small act or a major act, to report it. Go to nyc.gov/stop-Asian-hate, report anything you see so the NYPD can act.
Police Commissioner Dermot Shea expressed concern with legalized marijuana, saying that letting people walk on the streets smoking weed is going to change policing, not to mention what he says are quality of life issues. The NYPD has instructed their officers on how to handle the marijuana legalization law, which includes not batting an eye on those smoking weed in public where it isn't expressly disallowed, to avoid exchanges unless it's for money, and that they can't perform traffic searches based on weed smell alone. The mayor signed an executive order called the Rooney Rule that mandated the NYPD interview at least one member of an underrepresented race in any of the upper ranks open positions. The Rooney Rule refers to the NFL's policy of doing the same thing in order to increase diversity among its staff. Specifically, the rule applies to commander positions and any rank above captain. The Manhattan DA, Cy Vance, subpoenaed Trump Organization CFO Andrew Weiselberg's bank records, apparently to make Weiselberg cooperate with Vance's investigation into Trump and his company. Some of the records raised questions about gifts Weiselberg got from the former president. Over at the city council. Despite a city council law that prevents him from running for office, disgraced former politician Hiram Monserrati, who was convicted of assaulting his ex-girlfriend, submitted signature petitions to the Board of Elections to get him on the ballot for a Queens City Council seat. Monserrati will probably not be able to get on the ballot even with his submission anyway. Council candidates in the race for Alan Meisel's District 46 seat are complaining that former chair of the Brooklyn Democratic Party, Frank Sedio, is getting involved and issuing challenges to candidates' petitions, despite a general vow not to challenge petitions due to the challenges of the pandemic. 270 signatures are required for a city council candidate to get on the ballot, and Sedio, who is now president of the Thomas Jefferson Democratic Club, said, quote, "We proudly filed them," referring to the challenges, and that, quote, "We treat politics like war. We do everything we can to get our candidate elected." City Councilman Jimmy Van Bramer, Brad Lander, and 11 council candidates wrote a letter to Council Speaker Corey Johnson demanding the results of an audit examining the chamber's sexual harassment policies, having contracted almost $200,000 with a company called Redwood Enterprise to conduct the audit. The contract ended on April 30th of last year, but no audit was publicized. Speaker Johnson said the firm's work was delayed due to the pandemic. Astoria Queens Councilman Costa Constantinides announced that he was resigning from his office in order to take a job as head of the Variety Boys and Girls Club of Queens, stepping down from his office on April 9th. Constantinides' tenure as of late was marred by his bout with COVID as well as the ailing health of his wife over the years. Moving on to Cuomo. New York was on the list of states with the highest amount of COVID infections this week, with 50,000 new cases a week. New cases increased 64% last week, according to Johns Hopkins University data. Cuomo announced the release of an app called Excelsior Pass that acts as a vaccine passport for concert venues, sports arenas, and other events that can make it easier for society to avoid outbreaks and get back to normal. The concept of a vaccine passport is being developed around the world as states figure out how to keep away COVID-positive individuals and incentivize vaccinations. The Excelsior Pass was used in a pilot program for weddings and smaller events earlier. New Yorkers 30 years of age and older were deemed eligible for vaccination in the state on Tuesday. Universal eligibility, meaning everyone in the state can start getting vaccinated on April 6th. The New York Post reported that while Cuomo secured tests and later vaccines for his friends and family, his Department of Health didn't deliver tests to nursing homes, despite the pleas of Steuben County Manager Jack Wheeler, who only received enough tests for one nursing home in the county. Health Department spokesman Jonah Bruno said Wheeler is attempting to rewrite history. The Washington Post has more details about Cuomo giving friends and family priority for early testing and vaccines. Apparently, state troopers were on standby to rush samples to labs and the results came back within hours or a day, whereas others had to wait a week. Kenneth Cole, the clothing designer, was also someone who got an early test, and that the state's top physician was dispatched to Chris Cuomo's home, sometimes for hours. Despite New York City's intention to adopt the CDC's 3-foot social distancing rules for students in schools, the State Department of Health is threatening to preempt the city by keeping the 6-foot rule. The State Health Department eased rules pertaining to mandatory quarantines for domestic travel, not making it required for those who came from out of state to sit at home for 2 weeks before rejoining society. Cuomo announced that a $4.5 billion loan from the federal government for the purpose of the state to stay afloat last July has been paid off in full as well. The State Attorney General's office subpoenaed Cuomo's top aide, Melissa DeRosa, who admitted to withholding nursing home death data from federal prosecutors. The Attorney General's office also demanded numerous documents and have asked witnesses about their interactions with DeRosa. Cuomo is facing another accuser. Sherry Ville was visited by the governor and his staff in May 2017 following storm flooding in upstate Monroe County, and when the governor greeted Sherry, she said he manhandled her and kissed her on both cheeks. A picture was released of the governor seemingly kissing Ville on her left cheek.
That's when the governor looked at me, approached me, took my hand, and pulled me to him. He leaned down over me and kissed my cheek. I was holding my small dog in my arms, and I thought he was going to pet my dog, but instead he wedged his face between the dog and mine and kissed me on the other cheek in what I felt was highly sexual manner. I wasn't expecting that at all. He said, "That's what Italians do, kiss both cheeks." I felt shocked and didn't understand what had just happened, but I knew I felt embarrassed and weird about his kissing me. I am Italian, and in my family, family members kiss. Strangers do not kiss, especially upon meeting someone for the first time.
Gloria Allred, the attorney representing many women from the initial Me Too accusations, is representing Ville. According to sources as reported in the New York Post, State Health Commissioner and the Governor's Special Counsel Beth Garvey threatened nursing homes when they failed to pick up orders of vaccines despite not being apparently correct on the facts. Zucker threatened the nursing home operators in question with fines and other forms of state enforcement, although the operators submitted information about unvaccinated nursing home residents for data purposes and not for vaccine orders. While Cuomo was pushing back on calls to increase taxes on New York's wealthy, 15 billionaires donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to Cuomo's campaign account for a total of almost $570,000. And while his aides were working to hide the true number of nursing home residents dying from COVID, the governor was working on getting a $4 million book deal on his memoir touting his leadership during the pandemic. The governor had still not released his ethics disclosure documents revealing the true number of how much the book deal cost and how much he got paid. The governor also reportedly had his aides draft and edit passages on the book as well. The Citizens for Responsibility in Washington filed a complaint against the governor about his book. Weeks after service cuts were put in place in the LIRR, causing packed cars, making social distancing impossible, the cuts are being reversed. Documents from a whistleblower's lawsuit about how workers ignored the Mario Cuomo Bridge's structural integrity were unsealed this week, revealing the full complaint filed against the state and the transportation agency. The court disagreed with the constructors of the bridge to keep the record sealed, voting unanimously against them. The whistleblower alleged that the construction companies falsified reports about the bridge's safety, including knowing about broken bolts installed on the bridge. State troopers are going to get body cameras for the first time. Cuomo announced this week, starting with state troopers in Albany, most troopers will get their cameras by the fall of this year. Last June, the governor signed into law a measure that mandated that all cops wear body cameras. The Rochester City Council gave the green light on their own police reform, getting rid of the current police union contract, making the department smaller, allowing cops to be fired for cause, and changing the way people are hired. But now the reforms have to go to the state legislature for approval. Buffalo's Republican Party isn't going to endorse a candidate for mayor this year, as a former Republican candidate from 2019 for comptroller, Ross Kostecki, refused their nomination. While the state approved legal marijuana legislation this week, 2 Long Island mayors want to have the ability to opt out of weed legalization in their counties. Freeport's Robert Kennedy and Rockville Center's Francis Murray said they're worried about impaired driving that might occur following legalization of marijuana. The law allows counties to opt out of the law by vote of the local governing body. Cuomo also signed into law the HALT Act, which transforms the state's solitary confinement system within prisons. The new law limits solitary to 15 days, limits the circumstances requiring solitary, and forbids solitary confinement against prisoners who are young, old, pregnant, the disabled, or those with a mental illness. Moving on to the state legislature. A deal to legalize marijuana in New York was finalized between members of the Assembly, State Senate, and Governor Cuomo, with the implementation of regulations for people to buy, sell, and smoke weed recreationally within 2 years. A final bill was approved by both chambers on Tuesday and Wednesday, with the governor signing it into law shortly thereafter. The bill legalizes growing 6 plants inside the home, allows the carrying of up to 3 ounces of marijuana, and establishes dispensaries for weed sales starting next year, with tax revenue going to schools and communities disproportionately affected by strict drug laws. Those with prior marijuana convictions can now have their records expunged as well. The April 1st deadline for the state legislature to pass a budget was blown past as there was no deal struck between the leaders of the Assembly, Senate, and the governor. The two state chambers are still not in agreement on how much tax increases there should be on the state's wealthy, with the governor not supporting outsized tax increases. Scared rich New Yorkers will flee the state. Despite there being no agreement, the state budget director Robert Mujica said negotiations are ongoing. The next day to keep an eye on is April 5th, where lawmakers are hoping for a, quote, timely budget rather than one on time. In the Assembly, almost 15 years after a Court of Appeals ruling saying that New York's school funding system is inherently unequal and unconstitutional, the Assembly is striking a deal that would provide state schools $1.4 billion a year in funding with a formula in place to steer money to poorer districts. The agreement also includes support in the state Senate and the governor's office. Assembly lawmakers are pushing back against implementing a Cuomo policy that interrupted the widely used Medicaid at-home healthcare consumer-directed personal assistance program, which 100,000 New Yorkers use. Over in the Senate, the state Senate's top Republican, Robert Ortt, filed an official ethics complaint against Governor Cuomo following news stories that the governor prioritizes friends and family in administering tests and vaccines. The Attorney General's office urged the Joint Commission on Public Ethics to investigate the reports. Over at the state judiciary, a Brooklyn Supreme Court judge dismissed the case after a plaintiff's attorney said he couldn't continue the case with his masks because he couldn't breathe. After the attorney refused a number of accommodations from the judge, they dismissed the case without prejudice, meaning they could refile the case later. Bronx Supreme Court Justice Allison Tuitt ordered that New York has to offer vaccinations to all prisoners immediately, saying that the inmate population has been arbitrarily kept out of the process. Cuomo's office didn't say whether they were going to appeal the ruling, considering universal vaccine eligibility comes next week. A week after the Commission on Judicial Conduct punished an upstate judge for texting a criminal defendant, the commission also recommended admonishment for a judge that commented on a Facebook post expressing support for law enforcement. Another week, another judge getting their wrist slapped for their political activity. The Commission on Judicial Conduct said that Suffolk County Judge Elisa R. Reyna gave advice and edited campaign materials for a political candidate which is, quote, prohibited political activity, according to the Commission, going on to say that Judge Reyna should be punished for the activity. Non-binary New Yorkers sued the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, the State Health Department, and Governor Andrew Cuomo in Manhattan State Court for failing to provide an X-gender option when filling out forms to apply for Medicaid, food stamps, and other government benefits. X-gender markers are available currently on birth certificates and driver's licenses. The Court of Appeals, the state's highest court, dismissed an appeal filed by former President Trump against a former contestant of Trump's reality show The Apprentice, Summer Zervos, who in turn claimed Trump defamed her by calling her a liar when Zervos said Trump sexually assaulted her more than a decade ago. Considering Trump is no longer president, his argument that as president he's immune from civil suits has become moot, according to the court, letting Zervos' suit continue. The Court of Appeals also struck down the creation of a 2012 special prosecutor created by the legislature meant to prosecute neglect and abuse cases against facilities housing those with special needs. 3 plaintiffs prosecuted by the office argued that the creation of the special prosecutor's office was an unconstitutional end run around the election of district attorneys, and the Court of Appeals agreed. The First Department Appellate Department in New York City approved the construction of a new jail in Manhattan as part of the larger plan to replace Rikers with separate jails in every borough except Staten Island. Chinatown residents challenged the jail's construction, alleging that the city is trying to circumvent local zoning laws. Another challenge against the jail construction in Queens was dismissed. Just as the first openly gay New York judge Paul Fineman stepped down from the Court of Appeals to focus on his health, he passed away this week from his undisclosed illness. A state appellate division court ruled that de Blasio has to give a conflict of interest board warning letter to the New York Times, ruling there is no exemption in the Freedom of Information law that lets the mayor hide that letter, which warned him of conduct that towed the line of a conflict of interest to media organizations. The letter arises from when de Blasio fundraised for a group called Campaign for New One New York, a nonprofit that advanced the mayor's own policy objectives. The Department of Investigations had originally launched an investigation saying the mayor may have violated conflict of interest rules forbidding de Blasio from soliciting donations from companies that had business before the city. The DOI eventually concluded that the mayor didn't violate any specific rule, but that his office occasionally didn't follow proper guidance. As lawmakers negotiate the state budget, the legislature is reportedly planning to restore budget cuts placed on the state judiciary at the outset of the pandemic due to fears of a major drop in tax revenue. The judiciary budget cuts infamously forced the early retirements of the state's oldest judges, who in turn sued the state alleging age discrimination. Brooklyn tenants of the Red Hook Houses NYCHA housing project have filed a lawsuit against the New York City Housing Authority because they've been without cooking gas since January. 96 apartments have been forced to cook their food on electric hot plates provided by NYCHA. 40 families joined together as a class of plaintiffs in their lawsuit against the housing authority, with the agency blaming ongoing repairs from damage caused by Hurricane Sandy from 2012 that aren't projected to be completed until next year. Moving on to Biden. The CDC concluded in a study that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are 90% effective against spreading infections 2 weeks after the second dose was taken. The study will provide hope that people won't have to wear masks again after fully completing their regimen following their second dose. Pfizer said that its clinical data indicates a 6-month immunity once someone completes their vaccine regimen. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky cautioned Americans against letting their guards down while more people get vaccinated, fearing a fourth surge from increasing infection numbers, and saying she has a rising sense of impending doom because of it.
I'm going to pause here. I'm going to lose the script, and I'm going to reflect on the recurring feeling I have of impending doom. We have so much to look forward to, so much promise and potential of where we are, and so much reason for hope. But right now, I'm scared.
The CDC also recommended an extension of its evictions ban due to public health concerns to the end of June. Following Walensky's comments in New York announcing universal vaccine eligibility, Biden said that 90% of America will be eligible for the vaccine by the end of the first week of April and urged states to keep their mask mandates.
That is by April 19th, 3 weeks from today, 90% of adults, people over 18 and over, will be eligible to get vaccinated. 90% of all Americans will be living within 5 miles of a place they can get a shot. And of course, it'll take time for everyone to get their appointment. It's a big country. And as fast as we're going, we still have a long way to go to finish this vaccination effort.
According to a CDC internal memo, new cases increased by 11% and the number of new COVID hospital admissions increased 4%. A new NPR Marist poll shows that although Biden continues to receive high marks for his handling of the COVID pandemic in the U.S., only a third of Americans approve his handling on immigration, as a massive migrant surge appeared on the U.S. border over the last few weeks. While vaccinations increased correspondingly alongside infections recently, there is evidence that earlier hesitancy to getting vaccinated amongst the population is decreasing. A CDC Census Bureau survey showed that 17% of U.S. adults would either definitely or probably not get vaccinated, down from 22%. Documents obtained by Politico shows that the White House is developing a network of volunteers to grow confidence in the vaccination campaign throughout the country, calling the group the COVID-19 Community Corps. Those that still haven't received their stimulus checks from the latest COVID relief bill, including people receiving Social Security benefits, should be getting their direct deposits by April 7th, according to the IRS. The IRS also announced that the agency will refund filers who did not take advantage of the federal unemployment tax forgiveness and ended up paying those taxes when they filed. A shipment from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was halted by the FDA because of a human error leading to a mix-up in ingredients placed in some vials at a manufacturing plant run by a firm called Emergent Biosolutions. The error may have messed up 15 million doses, a huge snag in distribution. Luckily enough, Johnson & Johnson vaccines are being imported from other countries, so it shouldn't mess up the distribution too much. The CDC released more guidance saying vaccinated people can travel. They just have to keep wearing masks as they travel and practice social distancing, but now no mandatory quarantining is necessary.
And while we believe that fully vaccinated people can travel at low risk to themselves, CDC is not recommending travel at this time due to the rising number of cases. We are at 64,000 new COVID cases today, and our numbers continue to increase. We had an increase of 8% today. I still continue to worry that with 80% of the population unvaccinated, that we have a lot of work to do to control this pandemic.
The FDA has allowed Moderna to put 50% more of their vaccines per dose, potentially increasing the speed of the 2-dose vaccines distribution. The DHS said that it's getting ready for the largest surge of migrants at the southern border in the next 7 months, with up to 800,000 migrants arriving by September. Newly released DHS information showed that Border Patrol encountered about 170,000 migrants in March, including almost 19,000 children and teens, double the amount from February. Videos of the detainment facilities released by the Biden administration showed deplorable conditions, with migrants packed together in makeshift rooms that are well beyond capacity. A byproduct of an overwhelmed Border Patrol are migrant border crossers running past them, with the agency saying an average of 1,000 people are sneaking past Border Patrol a day. An even more troubling byproduct to some is that Border Patrol has released migrants without a court notice, only with booking records, and that's just for the adults. Migrants are supposed to report to an ICE office 2 months after receiving their booking records. The Biden administration said that it is putting back in place the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, originally started under President Clinton in the 90s, tasking federal agencies to communicate with one another to respond to increasing numbers of anti-Asian hate crimes. The U.S. added about 916,000 jobs in March as vaccinations ramp up, speeding up economic activity and leading employers to start hiring. The unemployment rate went down to 6% from 6.2%, but is far from the pre-pandemic low of 3.5%. Despite the increased hiring, jobless claims increased to 719,000, up from 658,000.
So the bottom line is this. Today's report is good news. Today's report shows that the country can what it can do when we act together to fight a virus, to give working people the help they need. But we still have a long way to go. but I know that we're going to get there, and we're going to get there together.
The White House announced a series of initiatives to expand offshore wind farms, which are wind turbines constructed off the coast on the eastern seaboard. The goal would be to generate enough power to power 10 million homes. The initiatives include lease auctions, environmental studies, agency grants, and research and development efforts. Federal prosecutors charged Jeffrey Epstein's alleged accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell with sex trafficking of a minor when she allegedly groomed and paid a 14-year-old to have sex with Epstein. The Biden administration is expected to nominate Syracuse federal prosecutor Carla Friedman to be the new U.S. attorney for the Northern District of New York, covering Albany. An analysis by Politico found that most of the rioters that broke into the Capitol on January 6th aren't going to face jail time because they're only worrying about misdemeanors. The more serious cases are reserved for white supremacist organizations like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. One of the Proud Boys organizers, Joseph Biggs, claimed that the FBI regularly turned to him for information about Antifa cells in Florida in an attempt to paint his credibility in a positive light. Newly installed Attorney General Merrick Garland said that he's launching a review of the federal government's tracking and prosecution of hate crime incidents in light of recent anti-Asian hate crimes and the ongoing issue of states being trusted to report their own hate crime statistics, which usually fall short. Biden released his first list of judicial nominees to replace or fill vacated federal benches. 11 nominees include 3 black women, and 2 of the women will be nominated for the appeals courts. Biden said earlier this week that Georgia's passage of a new law that restricts voting in the state, including forbidding providing food and water to voters still waiting online to vote, is an atrocity that is a blatant attack on the Constitution and is, quote, Jim Crow in the 21st century. Republicans in state legislatures are proposing new voting restrictions that would restrict who gets to vote by mail, reducing the parameters of when voting by mail and affidavit balloting can happen, and cutting early voting. Companies like Delta Airlines and Coca-Cola are coming out in condemnation of the voting rights bill, including Atlanta's Falcons and Hawks sports teams, but the outcry is too little too late since the vote is already law. Meanwhile, the MLB decided to pull its All-Star game out of the state, citing the recently passed voting law. Education Secretary Miguel Cardona suspended the collection of more than 1 million federal student loans that are in default, applying to borrowers that took out loans from private lenders and who were otherwise not affected by the federal student loan freeze at the outset of the pandemic. Those who had their assets seized when they defaulted on these loans will get refunds. President Biden also signed an executive order instructing his agencies to look into how he can forgive student loans up to $50,000 just by executive action. Biden had earlier waffled on the idea of forgiving $50,000 in student loans per borrower, instead saying that he could probably get away with $10,000. As we mentioned a bit later, the Biden administration is planning their next big move, which would be a massive infrastructure package aimed at rebuilding the nation's roads and bridges, installing green energy projects across the nation, and paying for it all with tax increases on the wealthy and corporations. Details released later in the week include a $2.25 trillion plan that would include $650 billion for construction of roads, bridges, ports, railways, housing, the electric grid, high-speed broadband internet, the water system, and much more. The president later gave an address in Pittsburgh making his case for his infrastructure plan.
It's not a plan that tinkers around the edges. It's a once-in-a-generation investment in America, unlike anything we've seen or done since we built the interstate highway system and the space race decades ago. In fact, it's the largest American jobs investment since World War II. It will create millions of jobs, good-paying jobs. It will grow the economy, make us more competitive around the world, promote our national security interests, and put us in a position to win the global competition with China in the upcoming years. It's big, yes. It's bold, yes. And we can get it done.
Biden held his first cabinet meeting with infrastructure on the agenda. The president created a mini cabinet tasked with focusing on selling the infrastructure deal to Congress and the public, which includes the secretaries of Transportation, Commerce, Energy, Housing and Urban Development, and Labor. The Federal Trade Commission is officially contesting the more than $7 billion merger of biotechnology company Illumina with early cancer detection company Grail, in a test of antitrust challenges of vertical mergers when companies that don't compete with each other often get together. The Pentagon officially repealed a Trump-era policy that banned transgender Americans from joining the military and also expanded medical access for trans troops. New U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai said the U.S. isn't ready to cut tariffs on Chinese exports to the U.S. just yet, choosing to continue an unpopular Trump trade policy saying that tariffs are good leverage in negotiations. U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai also said the U.S. is suspending trade with Myanmar following the country's military, which recently seized power through a coup, killing hundreds of protesters demonstrating against the military's power grab. The State Department told embassy personnel to remove themselves and their families out of Myanmar amidst the violence against the coup. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said that Biden has no intentions of sitting down with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, saying the president is going to take a different approach with the North Korean dictator. U.S. presidents have been struggling with how to tamp down North Korea's threats of attacking South Korea or developing nuclear missiles, with Trump becoming the first president to not just meet Kim Jong-un but to also cross over into his country. The friendly missives didn't amount to anything, however, as North Korea didn't agree to reduce its missile tests. Biden will welcome Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga to the White House on April 16th, becoming the first foreign leader to visit the White House after Biden's inauguration. Sources told the Associated Press that the Russian hack of federal agencies through the SolarWinds software allowed hackers to gain access to emails of top Department of Homeland Security staff, including Trump's DHS Secretary Chad Wolf. Congressional sources also said that thousands of emails from the Bureaus of European and Eurasian Affairs and East Asian and Pacific Affairs were hacked and stolen. Biden held his first call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, promising to help the country continue to push back against Russia, which has started an incursion into Ukraine in 2014, annexing the eastern coastal state of Crimea and taking over the region of Donbass, providing military support to separatist rebels. Biden also pledged to support Ukraine with its fight against corruption, which was used as a front for former President Trump to try and get dirt on Biden when he was running against Trump, which led to Trump's first impeachment and acquittal. In a meeting with the UN Security Council, Secretary of State Antony Blinken implored the larger council to approve reopening Syrian border crossings to deliver aid to those in need. But with Russia and China using their veto powers, the measure is unlikely to pass. It only takes one country in the 15-member council to veto a measure and spell doom for its passage. Syria has been embroiled in a civil war for the past 10 years, which was sparked by the Arab Spring, where democracy activists spurred protests in numerous Arab countries to much failure. The U.S. and Iran agreed to hold tentative talks in Vienna regarding the Iranian nuclear deal, largely seen as disheveled since Trump withdrew the U.S. from it during his tenure. Obama convinced Iran to agree to scale back uranium enrichment program in exchange for the easing of sanctions, and other nations signed into the agreement as well. But Iran has since increased its enrichment as sanctions have been placed back on. Iran and the Biden administration have been doing a weird dance to see who would blink first about scaling back nuclear enrichment or easing sanctions. When Mike Pompeo was Secretary of State under President Trump, the State Department limited the policy of promoting human rights to causes championed only by conservatives, waving away reproductive and gay rights. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that he's scrapping that blueprint, returning to inclusive promotion of human rights.
I've asked our team to release an addendum for each country report later this year that will cover these issues. And we're restoring the practice of documenting these rights in 2021 and in future years. It's one of many steps, along with revoking the Mexico City policy, withdrawing from the Geneva Consensus Declaration, resuming support for the United Nations Population Fund, that we're taking to promote women's health and equity at home and abroad. Because women's rights, including sexual and reproductive rights, are human rights.
The U.S. released its annual human rights report showing that human rights around the world in select countries have gotten worse, including Russia and China, where the latter country is being called out for genocide against its Muslim Uyghur population. Former President Trump got on a mic earlier this week at a wedding that took place at Mar-a-Lago, his home resort in Florida, railing against the Biden administration and lying about his loss being rigged. Trump also railed against Drs. Fauci and Birx on a phone call with Fox News, saying they're two self-promoters trying to reinvent histories and that they had bad policy decisions that would have left our country open to China. The comments come after Birx and Fauci appeared on a CNN interview decrying the past administration's actions and saying that the first 100,000 Americans could have been saved had certain steps were taken sooner. According to documents released by congressional investigators, Trump's advisor Peter Navarro warned the president about the need to secure personal protective equipment and other medical equipment at the outset of the pandemic, but after the president ignored prioritizing that course of action, Navarro took it upon himself to negotiate deals costing more than $1 billion in federal funds that have started a slew of government investigations. Over in Congress, the Capitol went on lockdown temporarily on Friday after a driver tried ramming past barricades set up after the Capitol insurrection on January 6th and injured 2 police officers. All 3 were hospitalized and an investigation was underway. The driver later died from gunshots sustained from the police. Information updated reflected that the driver had a knife on them as well, and that one of the police officers injured in the attack passed away as well, identified as William Evans. Over at the House Ethics Committee upheld a $5,000 fine against Texas Representative Louis Gohmert when Gohmert tried sidestepping metal detectors outside the House chamber enforced after the Capitol was broken into on January 6th. Republicans like Gohmert claimed enforcing metal detectors and other security measures was overkill and a violation of his constitutional rights. The New York Times reported that the Department of Justice is investigating Florida Representative Matt Gaetz' alleged sexual relationship with a 17-year-old, where he also paid her to travel with him, according to 3 sources familiar with the matter. If true, Gaetz may have violated sex trafficking laws that forbid anyone under 18 from crossing state lines for the purpose of having sex for money or value. Gaetz admitted to being investigated and said the allegations against him are false and that he's being criminalized for his private sexual life when he was single. The news broke the same day that it was being reported Gaetz was going to resign from Congress to take a job with the new conservative news channel Newsmax. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said that if the allegations against Gaetz are true, he'll be taken off his committee assignments. Gaetz participated in a bizarre interview with Fox's Tucker Carlson, where he refuted the allegations, alleged the DOJ were extorting him in kind, and then brought up Carlson's own sexual misconduct allegations. It seems Gaetz' Republican colleagues knew to steer clear as reports came out saying Gaetz would show pictures of women he had sex with on the House floor. Gaetz said he isn't going to resign. Democrat Lisa Hart has agreed to drop her challenge of Republican Marionette Miller Meeks's 6-vote win over her for an Iowa House seat. Hart originally brought her challenge to the House, which has jurisdiction over election challenges, and said that there were an additional 22 votes that should have been counted for her. Republicans protested against the Democratic leadership to drop the challenge, saying it's an abuse of power to tip the scales on an election that was already certified in Iowa, and moderate Democrats piled on as well. Over at the Senate, Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins managed to survive her state's Republican Party's censure for her vote to convict Trump after his impeachment trial. Other senators were censured for their conviction votes. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell encouraged all Republican men to get vaccinated in an appeal reflecting polling showing that Republican men are the key demographic holding back from getting vaccinated, whether it's because of skepticism or stubbornness. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is in talks with the White House about how to fund an upcoming infrastructure plan that Biden wants to put forth to the tune of $2.25 trillion. The plan is to be paid for with increased taxes on the wealthy and corporations, reversing the tax hikes put in place by Trump and Republicans in 2017 that did not pay for themselves despite assurances that they would. Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen proposed an increase on unrealized capital gains at death, which are assets like investments which haven't turned into liquid cash payments yet, with an exemption for the first $1 million per person as part of the tax increase package to pay for infrastructure upgrades throughout the country. Part of the negotiations also include lowering the Medicare eligibility age from 65 to 60 and would also give the White House permission to negotiate lower drug prices for Medicare participants. Budget Committee Chairman Senator Bernie Sanders wants to also expand health care to include dental care. Biden spoke to Minority Leader McConnell over the phone to brief McConnell about the infrastructure plan, but McConnell still calls the idea a Trojan horse, claiming it's a bill just filled with Democratic policies. He said that Republicans should fight the plan tooth and nail. It's still not clear what the Republican approach will be because the party vacillates between declaring they're not going to support the bill but at the same time saying that they want to work with the president but feel that they're rebuffed. One policy lawmakers are calling for is the revival of the state and local tax deduction, which allows taxpayers to deduct the amount of state and local taxes they paid from their final tax bill. When Trump signed a tax bill into law that cut corporate taxes and those for the wealthy, a cap on the so-called SALT deduction was put in place, which hurts high-earning taxpayers in high states like New York. However, Biden isn't inclined to roll back the $10,000 cap on SALT deductions, which could imperil getting moderates on board to support his infrastructure plan. Over at the federal judiciary, the Supreme Court agreed to take up the abortion case of Cameron versus EMW Women's Surgical Center, which revolves around the right of the Kentucky Attorney General to defend an abortion law outlawing a specific type of abortion procedure where the governor refuses to support that law. The Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, is a Republican, while the governor, Andy Beshear, is a Democrat. The lower court's Sixth Circuit refused to grant Cameron the ability to defend the law, and the court said that it wouldn't hear arguments regarding the law's constitutionality. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments this week in a case revolving limits on college athletes taking part in the NCAA and getting compensated. Currently, college athletes are not compensated all that well, although colleges and the league profit off of their likenesses and performance. A majority of the court seemed highly skeptical of the NCAA's arguments that why the status quo should be kept, calling their legal efforts cyclical and disturbing. College athletes are attempting to get paid, receive scholarships, and other benefits. 7 years ago, Noah DeGuid kept getting text messages from Facebook that someone with his phone number was logging into his Facebook account. The thing is, Noah didn't have a Facebook account. That didn't stop incessant texts, and DeGuid filed a lawsuit against Facebook saying the company was violating a law against robocalls. The Supreme Court weighed in this week, ruling that the 1991 Telephone Consumer Protections Act only applies to randomly auto-dialed calls and texts, leaving spammers targeting consumers on purpose to keep up their annoying act. The case was decided on simple statutory interpretation as the text of the law only referred to random calls. The FCC in 2017 relaxed regulations concerning a large media company's ability to own a radio or TV station, as well as a newspaper, all within a single market. The Prometheus Radio Project, an anti-media consolidation nonprofit, led the challenge against the Republican-led FCC rule, saying the rules changed didn't take into account how women and minority-owned companies would fare against bigger players in the media market, but the arguments fell flat with a unanimous Supreme Court this week, with the opinion-writing Justice Kavanaugh saying that the agency considered a number of factors, including, quote, competition, localism, viewpoint diversity, and the minority and female ownership. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals overruled a lower federal court in saying that an Andy Warhol painting that used the image of late singer Prince wasn't fair use, the term allowing people to use a copyrighted image for general purposes. Prince was notoriously protective of his image, with this case striking a blow at the late pop artist Warhol. Trump's former personal lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen asked the federal court of Manhattan to apply early parole credits to his release for completing educational courses, which included fixing fire hydrants. A class of plaintiffs comprised of gay students from Christian colleges sued the Department of Education in the District Court of Oregon, saying exemptions to religious schools from having a discriminatory policy such as encouraging gay conversion therapy is unconstitutional and really takes aim at pressuring negotiations to discontinue those exemptions as the Equality Act heads to the Senate. Numerous Christian schools either said they didn't see the lawsuit or they pointed to statements where they affirmed their belief that homosexuality is a sin. The House of Representatives passed the Equality Act, which forbids employment discrimination against someone's gender identity or sexual orientation. The brother of Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez was sentenced in Manhattan federal court for life plus 30 years on drug trafficking charges. The case implicated the Honduran president himself, but the country denies any role in drug trafficking. Two Capitol police officers, James Blasingame and Sidney Hemby, filed suit in D.C. District Court against former President Trump, alleging that his encouragement for his followers to march on the Capitol led to the ultimate insurrection on January 6 to try to stop Biden's Electoral College certification. That incitement led to Blasingame and Hemby's physical and emotional injuries, holding Trump responsible. In national news, a fourth wave of COVID cases is worrying public health officials, with the U.S. reporting 65,000 cases on average, up from 10,000 from the last 2 weeks. Cases are mostly being seen in New York City, Michigan, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania, and is largely being attributed to COVID fatigue in states lifting their mask mandates prematurely. Almost 100 million Americans have received at least one vaccine dose so far. Vaccine passports are becoming the latest flashpoint among conservatives who say the government is trying to encroach on personal liberties. The passports refer to cards or apps that can prove someone got vaccinated so they can be let into some sort of event, and that way communities can avoid outbreaks. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is the latest Republican to publicly say his state won't do vaccine passports, signing an executive order forbidding its introduction in the state. Pfizer's vaccine trials in children have so far shown extreme effectiveness of their vaccine on 12 to 15-year-olds with no signs of symptoms. The success of the trial and presumptive FDA approval can mean kids can get vaccinated before the next school year. The data still has to be reviewed by independent experts. The U.S.'s death rate between 2019 and 2020 jumped nearly 16%, according to the CDC, blaming the pandemic for 1 in 10 American deaths and the virus becoming the third leading cause of death in the nation behind heart disease and cancer. An almost quarter-mile freight ship was finally freed after getting stuck in the Egyptian Suez Canal, so important to international trade. The Ever Given got stuck because a sandstorm blinded the navigator, and the blockade created a naval traffic jam that slowed the world's trade and created hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. A draft WHO report of an investigation into COVID's origins in China preliminarily concluded that the virus started from a bat infecting another animal, and that animal infected a human, and cast doubt on the theory the virus escaped from a lab. The theory is undertaken by many conspiracy theorists, and even Trump's former CDC director Robert Redfield subscribes to the idea. The credibility of the World Health Organization's report is also under attack because China did not cooperate fully with their probe. The U.S. joined 13 other countries in expressing concern over China's control of the investigation, as well as not providing all of the data the WHO needed. The various countries called for an independent investigation devoid of political interference. Opening arguments began this week in the murder trial of George Floyd against former Minnesota officer Derek Chauvin, who is accused of killing Floyd when he held his knee against his neck for nearly 9 minutes. Chauvin's lawyers will argue that Floyd's own health problems killed him. After the opening arguments, the prosecution called its first slew of witnesses to the stand, including a bystander that happened to be an MMA fighter who commented on how Chauvin placed his knee on Floyd's neck on purpose, and another bystander that recorded the encounter, expressing regret he didn't interfere. Chauvin's defense lawyers in turn tried impeaching the bystander's credibility by attempting to convince the jury they instead distracted Chauvin as he knelt on Floyd's neck. In the next few days of the trial, more witnesses included the shop owner who had originally called the police because George Floyd paid with a counterfeit $20 bill, children who witnessed Floyd dying, and an EMT that responded to the scene, and Floyd's girlfriend. Jurors also watched Chauvin's body cam footage, hearing that Chauvin thought Floyd was, quote, on something and that he was, quote, a sizable guy. Officer Lieutenant Richard Zimmerman testified that Chauvin's tactics were totally unnecessary and that the crowd shouldn't have been able to distract Chauvin, despite his defense attorneys arguing the crowd was dangerous. Vote counting continues this week after a unionization election concluded surrounding Amazon warehouse workers in Alabama, which can spur a domino effect in other Amazon warehouses. Amazon is heavily against the unionization efforts. After controversy was whipped up from rapper Lil Nas X's latest music video where he gave the devil a lap dance, the rapper featured a pair of black and red Nike sneakers with human blood in the soles. Nike filed suit against the rapper for trademark infringement. Members of the streetwear company MSCHF, or Mischief, confirmed that the Nike shoes in question have blood in the soles belonging to their staff. The shoes go for $1,018, referring to the Bible passage about Satan's descent from heaven. The Arkansas legislature passed a bill that would forbid doctors from providing some forms of healthcare to transgender youth, including hormone therapy and surgery. 16 other states are considering similar bills in a new front of legislation discriminating against transgender youth, with others including banning them from girls' sports. The World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap report concluded that it'll take about 61.5 years for women to level the economic playing field with men. The report goes on to say that although women have made the most progress in political representation, the rubber needs to hit the road with job market participation and income. The infamous mastermind behind bugging the Democratic Party headquarters at the Watergate Hotel for President Richard Nixon, G. Gordon Libby, has passed away at 90 years old this week. Libby was known as a quirky personality that was all over the place, including a stint at the FBI, hosting a talk radio show, and running for Congress, and more. Liddy was originally supposed to go to jail for not cooperating with Congress in the Watergate hearings, as well as for conspiracy, burglary, and more, but former President Jimmy Carter commuted Libby's sentence after serving just 4 years in prison. A shooting at an office building in Orange County, California, killed 4 people, including a 9-year-old child. The 44-year-old shooter who allegedly targeted the office was taken into custody. 7 corrections officers were fired in Texas this week after Marvin Scott III, a black man in prison at the Collin County Jail in Texas, died a month ago after being restrained, placed in a spit hood, and pepper sprayed. Scott was arrested for having 2 ounces of marijuana and was taken to the county jail after acting erratically and being diagnosed with schizophrenia at a hospital. The Texas Rangers are investigating the circumstances surrounding Scott's death. And that's it for this week's show of the 25th Hour, helping you stay on top of the 24/7 news cycle. Don't forget to rate us on Apple Podcasts, share us with your friends, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can email your tips and suggestions at the 25th Hour News at gmail.com and become a patron today to support the show at patreon.com/the 25th Hours for as low as $2 a month. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.